let's look at Angular and its use of routing. So Angular routing is different to the routing that we've been doing so far with Node and Express on the server side. So with Node and Express, your routes consist of URLs or URI paths that link to controller functions and modules. In Angular, routes link directly to your page components. So the app component acts as a parent view for your application, and routes will dynamically be loaded into a section of your parent view, and we'll have a look at this in a moment. So to create a new routing module, we need to use the Angular CLI command. So let's go and have a look at this and see what we need to do to generate a new routing module. So we've used this before, the ng command, and we want to generate a module, and we'll call it app routing. And we've got two options here that we can add on. The -- flat. So this will tell it that when it generates this module, that it will load it into the same directory as our, say, our app module.ts. It's not going to create its own subdirectory and put these files into. And the next option we'll put on here is module, so it should be -- module equals app. And what this is going to do is it will register this model with the imports array in the app module.ts file. So let's just run this and we'll see what we get. So it's created our app routing module specs.ts, an app routing module.ts file, and it has updated our app.module.ts. So let's have a look at the files that we now have. So this is just a stock default Angular application here, and we'll see in our source directory, app directory, we now have a file here called app routing module. And if we look at our app module, we'll see that it has been registered in the imports at the top and in the imports array of our ng module. All right, so let's going back to our app routing.module.ts file. We won't be requiring the common module import here because it holds information about how to use the ngIf, ng4, and all sorts of stuff like that. We won't be using that in our routing module, so we can remove the need for that. What we need to do now is probably add a couple of components that we can then use as routes. So let's go ahead and do that. So to create a component, we use the ng command, generate, or use the word generate. We can use the word component or the shortcut of just C. And let's create our login component. And we'll create one more, G, C, and maybe create like an account page. So this has created the components, put them in their own directories, and have updated the app module.ts to include an import for those particular components. So let's go back to our code and have a look at what we have now in our structure. We have inside our source app, we have an accounts directory and a login directory. So they will form the two paths, two routes that we want to use in this little application. Okay, so let's keep editing our app routing module file and we'll now add in routes to those two components that we have. So first we need to import two symbols, one for the routes. So this is adding in stuff from the Angular framework that we want to use on this page for routing. So we want the Angular router module, and these are going to come from the Angular / router module or API or library. Next, we need to create let's import in our two components so that we have access to them. So let's import our login component, and it's going to come from the /, it's in the login directory, and it's the login component, and bring in the other component, which is going to be our account component, and it's going to come from account /account.component. So we've now got our two components. So now we can create a constant, which we will call our routes, and it is of type routes, as coming from our import here. And it's going to have, our routes is going to be a route array, which is going to hold an array of JSON styled objects, which define our paths and what components they load. So the first component has a path, and we will call that path login, and the component it is going to load will be the login component. Our second route will have a path, and it's going to go to account, and it will have a component of the account component. What else do we need to include in here? So we need to, in our imports array in the ng module, we are going to be importing the router module, .for root, and passing it the routes, and we will be exporting for our exports in an array of the router module. So that completes the basics of what we need in this TS file for our router module. So we've created a routes for two different routes here. One which, when we have a path wanting to go to login, will load this component, and if we have a path going to account, it will load this particular component. So now we've got to look at is how do we create links to go to these particular routes, and where and how are these routes actually going to be displayed. So let's go back to our app component.html. So this is part of the sort of templating system on how our apps come together and run, remembering that it starts from the main.ts, which is in here, saying that we're going to bootstrap this module from the app module. When we go into our app module TS file, it says it's going to bootstrap using the app component. And then when we have a look at our app component TS, it's going to load as its template the app.component.html, and its selector is the app root. So when we come into the index, I know this is getting long, the index.html file, so this is the basics of our HTML document. So we've got our head section loading in any meta tags, the title tags, any other style sheets and stuff that we may want to add in can be all put in here. But this is saying that our app component will load into this part of the page via its selector, which is the app root. So next we need a location for where our routes are going to go once we've selected going to a new route. So in our app component, we can probably get rid of all the default stuff that we had on here, and we create a tag called a router outlet. So this will be a location where when we select a route, that the content for that component that we've selected will then get displayed inside of this particular tag here. So we might want to create a link which will get us to go to each of our routes. So when we're creating a route, a link that goes to a route, we use syntax of a router link, and given that we've got two routes here, one called login and one for account, we'll make the first one, we'll go to login. Let's do some typing. So it's still a standard A tag, but instead of using href, we replace that with router link. And we'll have our other link, which will go to what do we have? Account. Okay, so this will create our two menu items which go to login and account. When we select on one of these, the content of login will then be replaced into this container. If we'd gone to account, then the content of account gets loaded into this particular container.